Hey everyone, and now we're live, and
Hey,
Jill is about to join us. Hey,
hey Jack, how are you today?
I'm doing good. So today we were going to talk about China, or as
U.S., China.
Trump says, China, or however he says it.
Yeah,
My
we
Trump is not particularly good.
does he really say China?
Well, he's more like says it, China.
Oh, I see.
He doesn't pronounce it like a normal person. Like, oh hello, welcome to China. It's like, oh hello, welcome to China. Yeah.
That's funny.
Anyways, he has obsessions. But today we're talking about. We read an article, Ray Dalio's article, actually chapter 7 of his book about the difference in the way Chinese see the world and the way Americans see the world, and kind of like the differences between the cultures. And I guess it took us through um,
The ideologies
the ideologies of
and the
China.
cultural differences between Americans and Chinese, I would say.
Yeah. So, and as a result, we decided to talk about that. And then you had some questions that you listed.
Oh yeah, they were just really basic questions pertaining to what did you think about the article? What would World War III look like if there was an American-Chinese war? And
Oh,
how would AI help? You know,
China.
China. This is
China.
World War III. Whoever, what kind of AI mastery do you have to exhibit in order to win World War III? And do you think it will be ultimately decided by whoever has the best technology, like the best AI, or is it still about logistics and making sure that you have everything you need?
Well, at the end of the day, it's always about food and who has more food to eat
Yeah.
while starving out your enemy. But realistically, let's set this up as a more interesting. Well, let's set up the background for this, right? So the background for this, outside of the pandemic, is just like all of this kind of came to be or came into commonly discussed topic because of the pandemic and because of China's and America's China and America fighting with each other over trade and all things like that, right? But the important thing to kind of see in the background there is that we have uh, essentially an aging power, America, and a young and growing power, China, on the same scene, right?
Mm-hmm.
And all the interactions between Trump and China, Trump and America, America and China, and all these trade wars and things like that are happening right now. I see that as basically America realizing that China, who used to be like the American apprentice, almost, right? Like if you watch like the Apprentice, the TV show, or with Fearless Leader, or just think about like the situation of an apprentice, right? So let's say you have like a blacksmith apprentice, right? So a blacksmith is somebody who knows how to do everything, and then they take on an apprentice, and then they outsource to the apprentice a bunch of jobs that they don't really care for doing, like for instance heating up and quenching the metal and continuously making it stronger and stronger and stronger, which requires primarily just to stand there and beat the metal with a hammer and then shove it into cold, a bucket full of cold water, right? So they might have their apprentice first to help them get the water and then do these individual things that will help them um, essentially, do their job. And that was the essence of China, right? So in the 1980s and the 1990s, more so 80s and 90s than 2000 and 2001s, right? We treated China as an apprentice essentially, and we would send them like low class work. First, it was plastics manufacturing and things like that. Then it became more more detailed work, more intense work, just like with an apprentice. After you work for 2 or 3 years and as a blacksmith's apprentice, then they might start the blacksmith might start teaching you how to handle metal, how to get a very fine edge, how to get multiple metals blended together so you can have like a very sharp edge and at the same time a flexible blade for your sword. So all of those things come into power. And the apprentice is supposed to learn, right? And that's exactly what happened. And we get pissed off. We say, oh, China has stolen our technology. They haven't stolen our technology. They have learned from our technology while working as Americans' apprentice. And now what's happening is, in my little apprentice analogy, the blacksmith's apprentice is now just as good as a blacksmith. And now the blacksmith's apprentice is like, well, dude, I'm not going to work for you anymore. I'm not going to work for you for the rest of days. You chose not to retire. I'm just as good as you now. I'm just going to go across the street and open up my own shop. And generally speaking, that's how it used to work, and that's how it was supposed to work. And at that point, the blacksmith was supposed to be like, well, no, I'm going to retire, and hopefully you'll remember me well when you're doing well, and help me out as well. And that's how it was supposed to be, right? Except America is a country, not a person. So we have no incentive or interest in retiring. We want to continue to be prosperous and successful. And the fact is, now there's 2 blacksmiths in town. And now it's a competition to see which one is going to come out on top. Who's going to be the preferred? Who's going to be the master blacksmith, right? Is it going to be America or is it going to be China? And in our case, if you take the analogy to a full degree, what happened is the blacksmith would pass all his work to the apprentice. So at first it was, oh, get me water. Then it was, oh, beat this metal so it hardens up. And then it was, oh, make this blade so it's nice and foldy and flexible, but that's sharp, right? And now it's like, oh, the apprentice is doing everything. And the master, so to speak, the blacksmith, is just sitting there taking in work and passing it on to the apprentice, right?
But why isn't it a more symbiotic relationship where the apprentice can learn a new skill that the original master did not,
What's the point of the master then?
Well, the point is that he passed on the basic skills.
Yeah, I know. But what's the use now of the master once the apprentice has learned everything?
Maybe he has a specialty that he did not pass on.
But he passed on everything.
He passed on everything. So basically my question is, why can't America and China live peacefully?
Because the world is not big enough for both.
And when you say that, what do you mean? Like, there aren't enough resources for China to survive?
No, there's enough resources for China to survive, but America wants to be number one, and we're no longer number one.
How do we... Number one economy,
We're not a number one economy, we're not a number one producer, we're not a number one researcher, we're not a number one developer. We're not number one in anything.
And we're not even...
Except
we're
debt.
not even tied?
No.
So...
We still have the number one economy because of our financial services, because our GDP counts towards it, financial services. But if you cut out the financial services out of our economy, we are now even a number 2 economy.
Interesting.
And then you also have to consider, like, a company like Apple, right?
Yeah.
Manufactures most things in China and India. Sells a bunch of shit.
But they're still developing here in America.
Their GDP goes towards United States.
Yeah.
Right? But does most of the economic activity that Apple conducts, does most of that activity happen in the United States? No.
No.
So we're getting credit for GDP that happens in other countries, right? Where
that's modern, capitalism.
That's modern capitalism, but the problem with that modern capitalism is that we're getting credit, but who cares about the credit? What matters is the economic activity. We don't have the economic activity. We only have the credit for the economic activity. So I'll give a more concrete example, but then I want to come back to my blacksmith example. So a more concrete example is you take an iPhone, right? So let's say it's an iPhone that you manufacture in India nowadays. Some of the iPhones are manufactured in India. So you manufacture this iPhone in India, right? You spend $400 in parts manufacturing this iPhone, right? Parts and labor, right?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe out of that, about $100 is labor and about $300 is parts, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's actually cheaper than that, but I don't remember the numbers. I think the iPhone is like $290, something like that in parts, plus labor, plus transportation. So let's just round it up to 400.
Mm-hmm.
And that's $400 worth of industry that happens, right? Then Apple sells that iPhone for, let's say, $1,200, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's 3 times the price, right, of the manufacturing. And then they pocket the difference, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that difference is the profit of kind of credited to United States, credited to the United States economy,
Yeah.
right? But that profit is distributed to very small number of Apple shareholders within the company, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Apple shareholders outside the company, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now people will say, "Oh, millions of people own Apple shares." Yeah, but as an individual, as individuals, right? And in their retirement funds, etc., etc., etc.
Mm-hmm.
But those people still represent a very small sliver of the American populace.
Mm-hmm.
So that phone, that $1,200 phone that Apple sells, it benefits primarily people in India because they have jobs now as a result of that phone being assembled there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or I should say it benefits primarily people who own Apple stock and own Apple as a corporation, right? And then secondarily, it benefits people in India
who produce
the phone.
phone.
Very little of that benefit is sent to the rest of America, right?
Right.
So America gets
Well, one way in which, any of that money could go back to America is if Apple paid federal taxes, right? But who knows what Apple pays in federal taxes?
Well,
Amazon apparently pays zero, so
it's complicated. It's complicated. There's reasons why they do it that way, and there is reasons why that's fair as well. But the bigger issue is that when Apple, so like when they pay taxes, right? That still wouldn't benefit individuals. That would benefit maybe the federal government, and then they would have more spending, right? But they wouldn't necessarily benefit individuals. How does India get benefited from having those phones being manufactured in India, for instance, right? Well, the people who work on assembly lines now get paid salary for doing their job.
Mm-hmm.
Now they can go out and they can spend that salary on goods and services within their country,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So that money starts circulating in their country, right? So when an American buys a $1,200 iPhone, out of that $1,200, $800 goes to very rich and well-off Apple shareholders and Apple insiders, right? And people who own Apple shares in terms of profits and stock buybacks and those kinds of things, right? And of course, it goes towards advertisers and designers and developers that work for Apple here in the United States. So those people get benefited, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the $400 that you spend manufacturing and assembling that phone outside of the United States gets removed from our economy and transported to other people's economies. So as a result, what happens is we're making India richer, we're making other countries richer, we're making ourselves poorer because we're not really selling. It's not an even relationship.
So I imagine if we did make those phones in America, that relationship would get inversed, right?
Yeah, or if we made something in America that Indians want in India, and that we do not want here, that they want and we manufacture, right? In that case, we send them money, $400 at a time, so to speak, or less, but still. And then they send us money by purchasing our products,
Right. Yeah.
right? You have to remember that people always made fun of China, saying, "Oh, China, they like we buy things from them and they send it to us, and all they get is IOUs in exchange, right?"
Hmm.
Well, that's true, but what we're doing is basically literally sending them money,
Right.
right? And money doesn't have a lot of value to it, but what they're doing is essentially with that money, they're building power.
Hey, is it because China has a lot of natural resources that they use to make those things, or where are they getting the natural resources that
From
they?
all over the world. That's why they're trying to secure their Belt and Road Initiative. They're trying to secure natural resources from North Korea, from from Russia, from African countries. Basically, they're trying to take over a large portion of Africa because that's very rich in natural resources, and they are consuming those resources, and they want that's basically what they want their sphere of influence to be, is Africa, Russia, and Asia.
It's half of the world
Yeah,
distributed.
that's their half of the world, and they want that half of the world, and they want to be number one. And just like in my blacksmith example, they're basically saying, "Hey, I am a better swords maker than you are now.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be the number one swords maker, and you can make all the shoe horse things if you don't want to retire.
Mm-hmm.
Shoe horse Dalios, but you're not making any more swords because I'm better at it and fuck off."
Mm-hmm.
And that's what they're doing.
I can see why they might be having clashes with Australia, because Australia is in that part of the world, and
Well, Australia used to be in the same bag as America, right?
yeah,
So America was kind of like the top dog developer, producer, and designer, right?
during the 1900s.
1950s through 1980s.
Today, I learned that the reason why the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor was because America had stopped supplying them with oil and rubber, not rubber, weapons like machinery, so that they could
And
invade.
natural resources, primarily
And
wood and oil and gas and
yeah,
coal. Yeah.
so they could invade mainland China and the former colonies of Europe.
Well, of course. But I mean, today I found out that your high school education in terms of history was really terrible. Yeah, that's why they did that.
Interesting. So, what I picked up from that is that we would only go to war, I feel, if we threatened China's resource uh, trade route.
Okay, well, we'll get back to war, but I want to start from my analogy of the blacksmith, and I want to see if that analogy first of all tracks, and second of all, I want to see if basically for the listeners and for you also whether or not we think that it's fair what China is doing. And personally, I think it looks to me like it is fair what they're doing. What they're doing is just natural. That's just the way things happen when you have one party who is willing to be the apprentice, so to speak, and learn, and you have another party who is being a very lazy and rest on your laurels kind of master, who or teacher who fails to advance their own knowledge while they're teaching their pupil.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of America becoming even better and better and better at design and engineering, instead of America saying, okay, China is going to be our production partner, they're going to do all kinds of crazy manufacturing things for us, but we need to not let things slip. So we need to make sure that we are on the cutting edge of all technology. We are on the cutting edge of all development. We are on the cutting edge of every single thing. So that way, yeah, sure, they can build it, but we need to stay relevant by becoming basically a technological society that's going to be the key to the innovation in the rest of the world, right? Instead, America said, no, we would rather watch Apprentice and become business people. And that's the thing, business people, yeah, fake, or as we found out today,
merchants of Chinese goods.
Yeah, we became shitty, cheap Chinese merchants, and then Chinese people looked at us and like, oh, we can do that too, better and cheaper than you can.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's what you in the '90s and the big move for Americans was like, oh, I'm gonna go to China, I'm gonna buy products there, I'm gonna bring it here, and I'm going to become a millionaire. It adds very little to the value of the world. It adds very little to the world, right? But even back then in the '90s, it added a little bit more because there was no internet, there was no visibility for these products. So somebody could go to China, somebody could design some products and then import them into the United States and make some good money and actually add value to it, right? Right, and then in the early 2000s, the Chinese people said, well, why do we need to give these Americans shit? We can just ship things directly from China
Right.
and stock it ourselves.
Yeah.
And then Amazon came on the market, and then before Amazon, there were several fulfillment centers that came on the market for eBay and such. This is why a lot of eBay auctions, even in like 2000, 2005, 2006, 2007, you go to eBay, a lot of them will have like big, bright American flags and screaming like, we're shipped from the United States, we're shipped from the United States. But in reality, it was all Chinese sellers who simply paid for warehousing here in the United States, and these warehouses, as businesses, were fulfilling orders, fulfilling eBay orders on behalf of somebody else, and just charging money for the fulfillment.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And the Chinese have been extremely clever, I feel, because they not only dangled the Chinese population as a payoff for American corporations to go into China if things worked out, but they took over the entire American manufacturing industry.
Well, they did, but the thing is, from their perspective, they probably looking at America and they're like, we can't believe that they're letting us do this. You would think that they would be smarter and better.
They would notice our end goal.
They would know, yeah, like from their point of view. But you can hardly blame them, because what would you do if you had somebody stupid enough to just give you all their secrets in exchange for, 10 years of 20 years of fake prosperity? It's the same thing with that blacksmith, right?
Well, that's terrible. That's like, let's say, for example, you're Coca-Cola, right? And you want to go into Chinese market, and you take your production to China because they promise.
Well, Coca-Cola doesn't produce anything anywhere outside the United States. It only bottles things outside of the United States.
Okay, but
So it's a bad example.
Can you pick something else?
Well, again, I want to come back to my. I don't know. What are you trying to illustrate, though?
I'm trying to say that China was exceptionally clever in promising the Chinese people to American corporations, so that they can sell their wares, and America failing to see that their ultimate goal was, in fact, making everything. Figuring out how to manufacture everything from Americans.
But how was that secret? Americans, I talk to, and I mean, for fuck's sake, I'm American, but when I talk to people here, a lot of times I hear just that thing where like, oh, China had a devious secret plan. And I'm looking at it, I was like, what are you, fucking stupid? It's just like, again, this is why I think the
Okay, so the population is just stupid, myself included.
Well, I mean, okay, hold on.
Because management should have been able to see that,
and they did, but they got rich as a result. Mm. Everybody who sold out America got rich at its core. Not only did they get rich, they were applauded for it, and they were called businessmen.
Mm-hmm.
They're men of steel who go to do business by selling out America, and that's what it really was. But the reason why I chose the blacksmith analogy, the blacksmith apprentice analogy, is because, again, let's run through it because it's visual, so people can visualize it. So you have a town. In that town, you have a bunch of people, and they all need blacksmithing services. They need they need somebody to make swords and shoe horse Dalios and other things out of metal, right?
Mm-hmm.
Doors and whatever the fuck blacksmiths do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Welding stuff and such. So this town only has one blacksmith, right? And the blacksmith does everything. He's prosperous as a result. He's happy, and he does things, right? And then he takes on an apprentice, and an apprentice comes in with no lies about it. The apprentice doesn't lie about it. He's like, "Hey, I want to be your apprentice," and the blacksmith says, like, "Oh, that's fine. Okay, what can you do?" And the apprentice says, "Well, I don't know how to do anything right now, but I'm hoping to learn everything you know." Right? China did say that. They said that. They intended it from day one to do this, right? So the blacksmith takes on the apprentice, and he starts teaching the apprentice, things, right? And he first tells him, like, "Oh, go get me some water, and go get me some other." So that's easy shit. So the apprentice does a decent enough job. Maybe he's weak at the moment, but because maybe it's like a kid, like a 17-year-old kid, he can't carry that much water and whatever. But he's learning and getting better and stronger and such. Also, as he grows up. So eventually this kid gets water, and then he starts doing some basic things. And then meanwhile, the blacksmith thinks to himself, like, "Oh yeah, well, I'm going to keep the secrets to myself so my apprentice doesn't jump over me." But then the blacksmith gets lazy. Then he says, I could spend the entire day here, beating this piece of metal to turn it into a sword, which is my, most important task, right? The one that requires the most amount of technology. The most amount of technology is in making swords that are very sharp, but at the same time very flexible, right? And to do that, you put different hardness metals. You put very hard metals in the very center, and then you soften out the metals towards the edge, so it maintains malleability and it can be flexible, but at the same time, it's very sharp at the very, very edge, and it kind of becomes self-sharpening because the softer metals on the outside of the sword get worn away faster, while the center edge stays there, right? It's kind of like in your knives. You have fancy knives, and you may notice that some of your nicer knives, especially the ones that have that layered steel, they'll wear away on the sides a little bit faster than in the center, and that keeps the center of the knife, the edge, sharper for longer. In any case, it doesn't matter. That's what it involves in making a really good sword, because a really good sword is really sharp, but also is strong enough to where I should say, tough enough, because there's a strength and toughness, right? Or it's hardness and toughness. So you want hardness and you want toughness. It's tough enough to where you hit it against the other sword, it may chip, but it doesn't crack in half, right? So that requires a lot of balance, right? So at first, maybe the blacksmith doesn't teach the apprentice the whole trick, but he shows him how to do some of that, so he doesn't have to do it himself. But then eventually down the line, the blacksmith is like, "Oh, it's a nice day. I want to go sit by the beach. I don't really feel like doing anything. I'm going to teach my apprentice how to do it all, and then I'm just going to poof out of existence and go and take a vacation," right? And that's all nice and everything, right? But you have to plan for ahead of it. So if you are a blacksmith who's really close to retirement age, and if you saved up a bunch of money during your time, and you're thinking, I'm going to probably sell my shop to this guy after like 10 more years and retire, and that's okay, right? If you have that as a plan, then it's a perfectly beautiful relationship, right? Only what's happening here is the blacksmith, in my analogy, didn't really want to pass on all the knowledge to the apprentice. He just wanted to use the apprentice to do all the shit work that he didn't want to do, and use the apprentice to retire. Now, not retire in the, "Oh, I'm just not doing anything. I'm going to let this kid now do things," right? But retire in the sense of like, "Oh, I'm just going to have this kid do all the work, and I'll pocket all the profits." That was the blacksmith's idea, right? That was Americans' idea. Americans' idea was like, "Oh, no, we'll let them produce everything, but the high value aspects of having intense businessman meetings, that should always stay in America with majority of the profits, of course."
And technological advantage.
No. Technological, that's geek work. No, let the Chinese do that. We are men of steel and business.
Oh.
So we only kept that. The technological, that's like sitting there and beating the sword for a day. We might as well go to the golf course so we can have those power meetings at the golf course. And let those Chinese do the chain, figuring out the little numbers and little chips. Oh, look how cute they are with their little heads filling out the little chips. Okay, time to have some power golf. That's what we did. That's what we did in the 80s. That's
Oh my
what we did
god,
in
that
the
would
90s.
be so appealing to people in the Midwest and the East Coast.
Yep. That's the thing.
Whose culture of success has probably yielded this.
Yeah, the culture of success that we have in the United States has resulted in the apprentice to the blacksmith learning everything and then coming in and saying, you know what? I want to be my own blacksmith. Do you want to sell me your shop? You don't? What was your plan? Why did you teach me everything? Well, how stupid are you? That's what China is doing right now. They're like, how fucking dumb are you? You gave us everything and now you're bitching about it? We thought you weren't that stupid.
Oh, wow.
But I guess you are. And that's the thing. And now American, and of course not everybody in America, people in America have been screaming about it for years, but the ruling class in America, including Donald Trump, have been outsourcing every single thing to China because they're like, oh, we don't want to deal with that. Let China deal with it. We don't want to deal with this. Let China deal with that, right? We don't want to deal with trash. Let China deal with trash until they have the best recycling system on earth right now, right? They don't let us recycle into it anymore, but they sure as fuck recycle their shit, or we don't want to deal with that. Let China deal with it. Now they have the best manufacturing system in the world for many different types of manufacturing, right? And we don't even know, like aluminum, for instance. They have much better aluminum manufacturing than we do right now. Why? Because they do more of it, and we don't. And that's that simple.
What about medicine and technology?
Medicine and technology.
Which is important.
Yeah, but medicine and technology is the same thing. And now we are holding on to these last little shreds of knowledge, right? Now we went from that, from a young, virile blacksmith that has all of this knowledge and all of this like techniques that he brought over from like other lands that he's going to use and combine them into like better and better swords, right? So we used to be that hungry for knowledge, hungry for figuring out how to do things better, right? And then now we're like this decrepit blacksmith who's like, I did this 50 years ago this way, and I'm going to do this now. The distributor network with many different subsidiaries and many different disjointed distributors all over the United States is the only way to do business. Person-to-person selling. B2B. And by the way, high-powered meetings. This is what we're doing, right? So, and you can see that. You can see that in the American and the European approach to business right now. I told you the story recently. There's this dude on AV on YouTube. His name is, we don't know his name. I think his name is Chris, but his channel name is AVE. And he does all kinds of shit. He also does CNC stuff. So he purchased a CNC machine. I think it's a Haas CNC machine. A pretty expensive machine, hundreds of thousands of dollars. I think it's like close to $200,000 for everything that he purchased. He obviously took out a loan from a bank to do so, and it's his hobby. He wants to do it. He figured that this machine is going to last him into retirement, so he doesn't care, and he makes decent money, I suppose. So that's fine. So in any case, this man was trying to buy the machine. And he contacted all of the major CNC manufacturers. And none of them would return his phone call. Because he didn't contact them. He wasn't like, hello, my name is Joe, or Chris in this case. I want to buy a machine. He actually wrote letters to these things on stationery with his information and everything saying, I would like to purchase one of your machines. I already secured a loan. Can you give me a quote? And can you tell me how much it's going to cost, etc., etc., etc. I need it for my business.
Right.
He was doing it mostly as a hobby, but he also has a business, I think, where they refurbish like industrial equipment, and sometimes.
Is he in America or Canada?
Canada.
Okay.
He's Canadian. So he has a company that refurbishes industrial like mine equipment and stuff like that, and sometimes parts are not available anymore because maybe it's older or outdated equipment or whatever.
So he has to make his own?
Yeah, so by having a CNC machine, you can manufacture your own parts. Simple parts, but sometimes, something like a valve block, for instance, right? Like a valve block has a bunch of holes in it, and it distributes oil pressure, for instance, to a bunch of different components.
Mm-hmm.
Something like that may not be available industrially anymore, because that fits perfectly in that machinery, but something that in a day or so you can make on a CNC machine, and then resell the industrial piece of machinery for like $30,000-$50,000. So he goes to auctions, buys them, fixes them up, resells them. I think that's part of his business. I'm just guessing here, so I may be wrong, but that's what he's kind of secretive about his businesses and stuff. But the point is, the overarching point is that this dude was a small purchaser of such machines, right? He's only purchasing one, but it's a very expensive machine, and he was looking to buy it. And still, it's so difficult. And guess what? This part is not as difficult in China, because in America right now, if you go and you say, hey, I want to buy a CNC machine, a very high-end CNC machine, there'll be people in suits whose job it is to sell you one, who will literally point and laugh at you, even if you have the money. You can bring briefcases of cash, and they will literally point and laugh at you, because they're like, you're not even buying 10. Why would I even interrupt my golf game to help you?
Seriously?
Yes. Meanwhile, and this is what he goes over his show. Nobody returned. He called 4 different companies and dealers of those companies, right? So not just one phone call, many people, right?
Right.
Nobody would even bother talking to him, even giving him a hint of how much the price is. They're like, oh yeah, if you have to ask, you can't afford it. It's like, I have a loan. No, you still can't afford it. Don't even bother. We don't want to talk to you. I have 200. No, we don't need your 200. Are you sure you can even count that high?
But you failed to share the most interesting bit, the resolution.
Oh, the resolution is that he actually bought a Haas machine primarily because he contacted the distributor of the Haas machines in Canada, I believe, and they wouldn't talk to him in the same way. And then he called corporate, or he emailed corporate, I believe, which is in Europe somewhere. And those people called him back, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we would love to sell you one." What do you mean they want to sell you one? What the fuck? We'll have one delivered to you.
Yeah.
And then the dealer was pissed off because apparently the dealer didn't make his cut on it.
Yep.
But that's that's funny, and then it does demonstrate to you how entitled businessmen have become in the Western world, where they think they're entitled to commission even on sales that they personally refused to actually make, but they're entitled to commission on those sales, right?
Hey, do you think it's just a division of people who work with their hands and versus people who don't work with their hands?
I think so. I think we have way too many people who have never worked with their hands in power. And I think what happens then is you get these fucking, grifty bullshit artists in those positions instead of real people with real skills.
One of the most powerful stories I've heard about people who work with their hands, I think, is based on that book Snowball about Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett's family, his grandfather worked really hard with his hands, running a shop in the Midwest somewhere. And then his son was a senator, and then, Warren Buffett got to be whatever he was.
And that's fine.
It took 3 generations of going from, working with your hands and being like a spendthrift. Is that what you call it?
Yeah, kind of.
Like being really strict and watching everything.
Yeah.
And then the next generation gets a little better. Like in the typical American dream, he has, less physically demanding work. And then the following generation has even less physically demanding
but
work.
at the same time, honey, it's also really important to remember that many Americans right now are struggling. So when we're talking about physically demanding work, one can say, well, it's certainly better to sit in an office, in an air-conditioned office, than it is to dig a ditch. But in reality, we are sicker, and more miserable society right now than we were 30 years ago. We are sicker and more miserable than we were 30 years ago. That's a fact. That's a fact.
Because digging a ditch.
Because digging a ditch has
exposes you
health
to vitamin
benefits.
D and cardio and
Yes.
muscle.
Yes. All
training.
those things that we completely try to cut out as much as possible from our life, right? And there's plenty of people in America right now who are struggling because they're working 2 or 3 jobs. But they're making these menial little projects. Maybe they're walking around and stocking and restocking shelves or moving product from one place to another. They're not doing actual constructive work, right? So they're dying inside. They're getting fatter because they're eating their sadness away, and then they're constantly stressed out because instead of having a standard 9 to 5, like in Germany 9 to 3 type of work where you appear somewhere, you do your shit, and then you're gone. Like what I found marvelous or interesting recently is just like the attitudes of work in Germany versus United States.
Okay, what's the difference?
Well, it was from Economics Explained, and he was showing these studies that show how in Germany, and it would be interesting to talk to some German people who can qualify this. The way you can show your boss that you are a hard worker and that you deserve a promotion is by working less. The less you work, the more, but not the American side. Oh, I do nothing, and therefore I'm the hardest working person over. No.
So just getting your tasks done faster.
Exactly.
It demonstrates your efficiency.
Exactly. If you come into work and you leave by noon because you're done, your boss is like, "Go, Friedrich. Everybody should be like Friedrich. Look, we don't even have to turn on lights in his area anymore. He's saving us money." Meanwhile, in America, it's like, it doesn't matter what your output is, as long as you just bear down and you're there. You're there no matter what.
If you're there from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. every day.
Exactly. You just come in before your boss is there and you leave after he leaves. And you just do that, and that shows that you're hardworking regardless of how little your output.
Oh, gosh.
And that's because, again, we have right now in America, in all the middle managed positions, a bunch of bullshitty grifters. If we didn't have bullshitty grift, because if your boss, right, if your boss works with their hands, or had worked with their hands before and knows what's involved in doing some tasks, when they look at you doing those tasks quickly, they're like, "Oh, good for you. You seem like a good worker. It would take me a whole day to do that, and it took you only 6 hours. Good on you. We should promote you. You can do even better," right? Meanwhile, in America, these fucking vapid pieces of shit that occupy middle management.
And there's also a preference for seniority.
That's true too. But they look at it and they have no fucking clue how long or how difficult it is to do something. They have no fucking clue. So the only judge that they have is, well, are you standing in that one place where you probably don't want to stand, but we told you to for 10 hours. You are? Okay, that must be hard. You're probably working harder because that's all I really have to go on.
Gotcha.
That's the problem. That's the problem that I see in our culture.
That systemic failure probably weakens your entire society.
Yeah. And the systemic failure comes from our idealization of business people. And our idealization and our, not idealization, it's idolization. Turning into idols, people like Donald Trump. Turning into idols, people like the fictional Gordon Gekko from that Wall Street movie. Turning into idols, people who grift rather than work. That's the thing. Think about all the American comedies, all the American movies, all the American, especially in the 90s, they're all about grifters. None of them about, here's a hardworking individual who worked really hard and built a business and then really, really, really took care of his community.
Maybe because that's not glamorous.
Of course. No, it's far more glamorous. Here's a guy who lied for 2 hours and 30 minutes, and then just by pure luck, everything still worked out for him.
Right.
That's what we idolize in America.
We've glamorized.
And glamorize in America. Yeah. Look at the movies from the 50s. Look at American movies from the 50s full of competent men who, they didn't have as many women parts there, but it doesn't matter. But competent men who make decisions, smart decisions, justifiable decisions. Like, no, we're not going to separate and search for a monster. We're going to go together so we don't all die. That's from the movie The Thing from the 50s, right? Because that's what competent, intelligent men who care about their own survival and survival of their colleagues would do.
Yeah.
Grifty, bullshit artists would be like, let's split up and look for clues so we can get killed one by one.
So we can cover more area faster.
Yes, exactly.
And be more efficient.
And that's why I see where all of our problems.
So have we sacrificed our entire society just for more efficiency, for efficiency's sake?
Well, not so much efficiency as much as, because again, I'm trying to specifically point out that the people who are in charge right now, and people who have been in charge for quite a long time, for the last 50 years or so, are
thinking very individualistically.
They're individualistic and they're grifters. Like, people often ask me, why do I hate, with capital H, our wonderful, fearless leader, Donald J. Trump, so much?
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I hate him is because I am convinced beyond all doubt that if there is an action that could slightly besmirch his reputation but greatly benefit America versus an action that could slightly help his reputation but greatly harm America, he would always, without exception, choose the second one, because no matter how little the price that he has to pay, it's still too great to defend America. He says America first, but in reality, it's Trump first.
Yeah.
It's always Trump first.
Mm-hmm.
And these people in these corporations that I see, that I interact with, a lot of them, this is why I'm so impressed by Ray Dalio. I'm so impressed by people who, within their lifetime, transition away from their previous role. Because he says that any person's lifetime is divided into first, depending on others for help.
Mm-hmm.
Then, building something for yourself so you have the ability to help others.
Mm-hmm.
And then, in the last stage of your life, you retire from the building, you pass that on to somebody else, and then you help others.
Mm-hmm.
So in his business, he first learned from other people, from his coaches and mentors and stuff like that. Then he built up his company. Now he has transitioned his company into new management that he coached and maintained over the years. And now he's just floating around the hallways of their bridge.
Like a grandpa.
Yeah, as the ghost of Christmas past who tells people how the doom is coming, right?
Yeah.
And demands that people help him with his stupid writing,
Mm-hmm.
right? Well, his writing is actually really good, and his writing is really bad, quite honestly. But his ideas are good,
Mm-hmm.
and where he's going with them is good. But the point that I'm trying to make is I respect people who, within their lifetime, are able to give up the thing that they perfected beautifully and transition it to somebody else.
Oh, that's like an athlete who retires at the apex of their career.
Exactly. It's like being Michael Jordan and retiring and not coming back when you suck and you're old and everybody and their grandma can kick your ass.
Right.
Yeah.
Or Michael Phelps, who retires when he wins,
Yeah.
X
But
number
it's
of
actually deeper than that, because it's not just retiring and say, fuck you all, I'm going out, right?
medals.
It's retiring, right? After you have a protege that you push into your position,
Mm-hmm.
that you've mentored over the years,
Mm-hmm.
and then sticking around to mentor other people in that because the way it's supposed
So
to
what Ray Dalio is doing.
Yeah.
He not only mentored people in his company, Bridgewater, but
now he's trying to do
reaching out to
now
the
he's trying to
entire
do
population.
exactly more, because there's the different stages of mentoring. First, like when you're developing early on, you just need people who are not going to carry you all the way to the finish line, but people who will just help you get the mentor that will help you carry. So
Mhm.
basically, the way you do mentors is you first get a mentor who will help you get the final mentor, and then the final mentor is supposed to carry you to the finish line and let you step into their position once they're ready to retire.
Mhm.
That's how it's supposed to work,
Mhm.
right? So he's already done the let somebody else step into my position part. Now he's just backtracking, and now he's like, nah, I'm a general purpose. Let me get your shit together so somebody else could mentor you type of mentor. Right? And that's very important. This is something we lost in our economy because, in our country, because so many people in our country are just not fucking retiring.
And they're not apprenticing anyone either.
Well, they might be apprenticing somebody. But unless you are willing to retire at a reasonable age, at a reasonable time when your apprentice comes into their own, don't take on apprentices. The worst thing you can do is waste somebody's time taking on really important years of their life to make them your apprentice, where they do all the crappy work for you, technically speaking, and they make you money, they make themselves money, and then when they are ready and willing to step into your position because they're now know as much as you do, you say, oh, no, now I'm going to fight you for control. I'm going to make up shit about you so we can get fired because I don't want to retire yet. And that's what happens all the time in America, especially in corporate America, because these fucks don't retire.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you look at academia, for instance, and you look in academia, people in charge of different universities, 40 years ago, it was people in their 40s. Maybe some people in their late 30s, mostly people in their 40s to 50s, right? Now it's people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s.
Yeah.
Mostly 70s and 80s. Being deans, heads of universities, heads of different colleges inside a university. I mean, it's ridiculous. And why are they still there? Why are they there 20, 30 years past their prime?
Because they're no longer forced to retire.
Because they're not forced to retire. And think about it this way, in 30 years, do you think those people have never, ever, ever created what is it called? A good enough, like a solid apprentice for themselves?
No, it's sufficient. It's more than sufficient.
It's more than sufficient amount of time. So they have apprentices. And then you ask yourself, well, in academia, why do we have such an explosion of administrators?
Because we need to pay out money going to them.
No. What happens when you have a bunch of apprentices and you refuse to retire? Well, you got to shove them somewhere. So you create bullshit administrative positions and put them on there and basically saying, you know, you did apprentice for me. You hope that you will take my position. You already learned as much as I need to teach you, but I'm not ready to retire yet because I really love power and I'm really a grifting bullshitter. So...
Do you think it's because those people have nothing else to do with their time and they're afraid to try something new at the ripe old age of 65 or 70 whenever they retire?
That's probably true. But let me go back to my argument, though. So what I'm saying is all of these administrative positions were created to slot into them apprentices who you're not willing to give up because they give you prestige, but you're also not willing to retire and put in your place. That's something, isn't it? That's really devious. If you want to talk about who sold out America, if you want to talk about who harmed America, if you want to talk about whose fault it is that we are in a situation like that, those are the people. Those are the people who said, I am more important than we, and I'm going to do everything in my power to continue to feel important. Because fuck we, it's all about I. This is why I hate the 80s. The 80s was the I decade. It's not do what's good for society. It's not do what's good for your community. It's not even do what's good, what a good human being would do. It's like, do what feels good because it's all about you because you are a businessman.
You can be a star.
Exactly. Only you can be a star. Everybody is special. It all came out from that same decade of bullshit.
I feel so wrong about saying all of this, and I'm not sure I entirely agree with you, because there's room for you to make your own choices, but also room for you to work with others in making, working towards a common goal.
No, hold on. I'm sorry. Let me pause you there. I agree with you. And there are times in your life where you have to make choices, I-based choices.
Yes.
So when you are 10 years old, you make when you're 1 years old, it's all about I.
Yeah.
When you are 10 years old, it's 90% about I.
Mm-hmm.
When you are become a parent, when you're 20, 30, 40 years old,
Mm-hmm.
and you become a parent, it no longer becomes about I. It now becomes about
We.
my child and I,
Yeah.
right? Or my family and I,
Yeah.
right? It becomes about small we,
Mm-hmm.
right? By the time your kid graduates from college and starts maybe dating and stuff like that, it becomes a slightly bigger we. Because it's like, oh, now it's about him and whatever, or her, and whatever that partner is going to be. And it's really what's important for our family and their family. And we need to have a bigger we.
Yeah.
Right? And by the time you get into your 80s or 70s or even like late 60s, it really needs to be about, by that time you should have children, maybe grandchildren, maybe even great-grand. That's
Most
unhealthy.
people have great grandchildren.
Trashy people have great-grandchildren by the time they're 60. But regular people would have at least grandchildren maybe by the time they're 60 or 65.
Every generation reproduces at the age of 20. Okay.
Not quite 30. 30
Okay.
for you to be 60, you can reproduce at 30 and then have your kid reproduce at 30. By the time you're 60, you have grandchildren. Right?
Oh yeah, that's true.
So that's quite reasonable.
Yeah.
That's why I said great grandchildren. That's a little trailer trashy. Grandchildren is good, but the point is, by the time you get to that age, you're supposed to know enough people, and you're supposed to have enough people in your life that you deeply care about. Not just people in your family, but also people at your work, people who you're mentoring, who you deeply care about, where you're no longer supposed to think about it with the I, or even the lowercase we, or even the uppercase we, but the big S, every single letter is uppercase, WE, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're supposed to identify with your country and your state and people on this planet, right?
Mm-hmm.
And actually start caring about them, right? And what I'm saying is, the 80s has trained us to never ever leave the I. So it starts with a lowercase I, and it just grows bigger and bigger and bigger into one gigantic capital I. This is why I hate Donald Trump, because Donald Trump is one gigantic capital I.
Yeah.
That's all it
agree.
is.
But our entire society has grown into a huge I.
Huge I.
This is why we wrap everything in plastic and, are basically destroying our environment.
Yeah, like you buy spinach. You can buy spinach in a paper bag, right? Or you can buy spinach prepackaged for you in a plastic container. And you say, well, it's better to buy it for all of us. For the we, it's better to buy it in a paper bag. But I find it easier to stack in my fridge like this, so fuck them.
And the egg cartons, too, and
the egg cartons and everything else. Soviet Union, by the way, you would bring the egg cartons. They wouldn't give you free egg cartons.
And the move to go away from grocery bags just results in thicker plastic bags that are harder to to biodegrade.
But generally speaking, and the reason why this I versus we is so important is because we are approaching a crisis. We are right now approaching a we versus I crisis. And the we versus I crisis is that the pie, the economic pie of the United States is shrinking. And it's not going to shrink dramatically, but it's shrinking because for some economic reasons that we just talked about, China is becoming more powerful, America is becoming less powerful, there's less and less work in America that produces stuff. But more importantly, at this moment right now, the pandemic, right? The pandemic just hit everybody, right? And everybody's struggling right now, right? And the economic pie has shrunk. right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'll give you an example. I was listening to Louis Russman from Russman Repair Group. He repairs laptops in New York, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the guys I listen to. And I'll retell the story that he told. He interpreted it differently because he doesn't feel as cynical about people. But let me interpret this story in a different way, and you see what you think
What's
about
the
it.
story?
So he has his store in New York,
Mm-hmm.
and of course, in New York, real estate prices are extraordinarily expensive. So his storefront facility is only 2,000 square feet,
Mm-hmm.
which is not that large. I mean, if you think 2,000 square feet is about, it's a short window front and kind of a deep space, like half a block space inwards, right?
Okay.
So they have about 11 people working there,
Mm-hmm.
right? In terms of a number of employees, plus I think him, so he has like 12 people on the payroll or 14, I don't remember.
So does he own or rent a prime location in New York City?
He rents.
Okay.
So he rents a location in New York City.
Okay.
Now, I don't know why he did it that way, quite honestly. There are better ways to arrange his business and stuff like that.
Okay.
But that doesn't matter. The main aspect of it is that they're doing pretty good business. They work a lot with schools that have laptops and stuff like that, like colleges who have MacBooks. They primarily fix MacBooks.
Mm-hmm.
He constantly bitches about MacBooks, but nonetheless. So anyways, he tells me the story that, or he retells on his YouTube channel, rather, the story that, he, for the last couple of months, he hasn't been paying his full rent.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because he's paying $12,000 a month for 2,000 square foot store. That's very, very small. It's not large.
Yeah. According to CNBC or somebody, only 65% of people paid their rent in full. I'm sorry, paid partial rent for June, and then 75% paid partial rent for July.
Mm-hmm.
So I can see this number growing bigger every month since the pandemic.
Well, okay, so then that number will grow bigger for most places, right? But again, think about it this way. If you are in New York City, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're paying $12,000 a month for 2,000 square foot place, it's actually like 1,800 or something. Not very large. And on top of that, you are living and you're paying very expensive taxes and stuff like that in New York.
Mm-hmm.
But you're not getting any traffic through the door.
Mm-hmm.
The whole point of paying 12,000, like, okay, the same space in San Diego would cost maybe $3,000, $4,000.
Seriously?
A month, yeah. It's an industrial space.
Okay.
Right? Maybe $5,000, right?
But I thought he was in a prime location.
No.
Where it's basically part of your marketing. You're marketing yourself in a...
Exactly. So in San
location.
Diego, right next to like the architecture school, for instance, that same location might cost $7,000 to $7,500.
Okay.
Right? Still not 12.
Yeah.
But it will cost something, right?
Right.
But you're paying that extra. So in San Diego, for instance, we're using San Diego because we're familiar with it. So in like the outskirts area, not outskirts, but like further away from downtown area, that same location would cost maybe $3,500.
Okay, that makes sense.
Right?
But people would have to find you somehow.
But people would have to find you and stuff like that. So in his case, his location cost $12,500.
Mm-hmm.
$12,500 a month, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's on top of all the payroll and stuff they have to pay and stuff like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And and it's a shitty building, so most of it comes down to traffic coming from the street.
Mm-hmm.
And he was showing how the traffic coming from the street in that location went from pretty good, very good because it's in downtown and in very busy location in Manhattan, to nothing, literally like almost zero, right? During the pandemic, because nobody's on the street. All the schools are closed. He's positioned next to the Institute of Fashion, which is like a big fashion school in New York. He's positioned next to NYU. He's positioned next to a train station, to a bunch of other schools, because a bunch of people who in schools use MacBooks. A bunch of people who are in schools have a tendency to spill shit on top of their MacBooks.
Yeah.
That's a lot of business.
Right.
So But none of that business exists because all these students are now going to school online. They're not going by his shop. They're not spilling coffee on their laptop next to his shop. So as a result, he doesn't have that business. He has a little bit more mail-in business. So their mail-in business went up, but their walk-in business went to the fucking gutter, right? So then, so as a result, he has been paying $6,000 to $8,000, depending on how well they do that month.
Yeah.
He says like, I pay myself, I pay my people, and then I pay my rent.
Yeah.
And if we make good money, we'll pay 6,000. I'm sorry, 8,000. Sometimes 10,000. Sometimes some of the months we pay 8,000. Right?
Yeah.
And he says that his building is owned by a co-op with a bunch of people in it, right?
Yeah.
And a couple of days ago,
a lot of New York buildings are owned by co-ops.
Yeah. And a couple of days ago, a woman came in from the co-op board, one of the renters, and she started screaming at him, how dare he doesn't pay rent, that she has 70 gyms around New York.
Yeah.
Right? Now, this is obviously a very wealthy woman. Very wealthy woman.
Okay.
Not only does she have 70 gyms, she also owns an apartment above him, which is why she's on the co-op board, that costs $2.5 million, something like that, to $3 million. So very expensive apartment and very expensive building, very rich woman. Clearly probably isn't missing that. Maybe she's missing that $4,000 and $5,000, right? A month extra that she would be paying, but she would be getting, but she's not, right?
Okay.
And she's like, I want to see your books. I want to see every dime that comes into this place because you are not running this efficiently, and therefore, how can we trust you that that you're not scamming us out of money? Right? And that attitude, that's a universal attitude of rich people in America right now.
Yeah.
And that is the illustration of the shrinking of the pie that I want to explain. So this woman, now, she probably isn't paying any rent right now on any of the 70 gyms that she owns, by the way. Like, I'm almost certain, because that's the kind of person that would come and bitch at somebody else about something like that, right?
Right, yeah.
That's exactly the kind of person who would, because she didn't say, I own 70 gyms and I'm paying rent on every single one of them. No, she just said, I own 70 gyms, period.
Yeah.
I'm probably not paying money on any of them, am I?
Right. Yeah.
But in any case, the point that I'm trying to make, though, is this woman right now is experiencing a shrinking pie, and she's like, oh, hell no, I'm not taking a smaller piece. Other people must take even smaller pieces of this pie, because I deserve 2/3 of this pie, and if pie shrinks, I deserve
all of it.
All of it. Or, I deserve half the pie, and if the pie shrinks, then I deserve 2/3 of it to make up for it. And everybody else must suffer, but not me, because I'm rich and I don't suffer.
Right.
And that's the thing. So we're approaching right now in our society a moment when rich people will need to decide whether they like their life or their money more. And this is why I'm putting it this way, because when I put it this way, people get really outraged. They're like, you're a monster. You're saying it's wrong to be rich. I'm like, no, I'm not saying it's wrong to be rich. What I'm saying is when everybody is suffering, you're going to bitch and complain how you don't want to suffer at all, and you don't want to take any of the suffering on yourself. And you say, no. Everybody's suffering, and now they don't make as much money. They make $1,000 less a month than they used to, and I make $10 million less a month than I used to. I used to make $30 million, and now I make only $20 million a month. That is unfair. I should only go down by 1,000 as well.
Yeah. That's very irrational.
But it is what the logic right now is amongst the wealthy. And what happens in those situations, and then the remainder of the population, the not so wealthy, with pitchforks, will see this as not, the whole "let them eat cake." That's a misquote, but nonetheless, if you read the history of that quote, it's kind of confusing. But in any ways, the "let them eat cake" quote by Anne Boleyn.
No, Josephine.
Oh, whatever. Napoleon's, yeah.
What?
Or this whole attitude that the Russian nobility had right around the time when they got pitchforked. This is where we headed.
Or the British people, for that fact.
in their many colonies.
Yes, in
Yes, yes.
India.
Yeah, it never happened in Britain,
Yeah.
luckily for them. But I think luckily for British people, what actually has happened is they lost their empire
Yeah.
and they saw how terrible that was, and they were like, we really need to figure out how to work shit out with the commoners here in Britain because it's gonna be really bad.
Yeah.
And that's the
And
thing.
let's all have universal health care.
Exactly. So that they gave them universal health care and they gave up a lot of their lands,
Yeah.
and all of that because they realized that the pie is shrinking, and if we don't share, people will kill us and take all of it.
Right.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
And then when I bring it up in many philosophy groups and stuff, people are like, "This is a monstrous and savage idea." I'm like, "Have you read history? Like, you fucking highfalutin high tower piece of shit. Read the history that you throw in other people's faces. Do you think it comprises of nice people doing nice things for each other? Do you think it comprises with wealthy people with capitalism always winning? Or do you think it comprises of guillotining and hanging and fucking savaging each other? Have you read the fucking history?
Yeah.
That's what we need to recognize, that it doesn't matter whether you think it's right to protect rich people. It doesn't matter whether or not you think it's wrong to say, oh, because you're rich, you have to give up more than if you're poor, right? It doesn't matter what your ideology is. What matters is at the end of the day, the large masses of poor people with guns will take shit away from those who have it. That's the reality of the situation. And we are approaching that reality very quickly, right?
In America.
In America. And then you say, oh, well, I'll just hire security. Oh, yeah. And what do you think is going to happen to your security when nobody has jobs? Everybody is unemployed. Okay, so your security guard is going to make some good money, and he's going to spend it on nothing while his family is getting robbed and killed personally.
Yeah.
Because they're slightly richer than the average.
Yeah.
Like, what the fuck as a rich person? And many rich people, the two-faced rich people in California recognize the Ellen Shore rich people. We call people who are
Democrats.
the Democrats.
The elite Democrats, meaning the really wealthy Democrats.
Yeah, the Ellen Shore from Boston Legal Democrats. The ones who are basically being generous and nice to the poor, primarily so that they don't get pitchforked and killed.
Yeah.
But those people are right. Those people are right. You might judge them. You might say, "Oh, you're just a two-faced piece of shit. You're only saying that because you don't want to get pitchforked." Yeah.
Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah, he doesn't want to get pitchforked. He doesn't want to get killed. Yeah, he owns 4 houses. Yeah, he has like 50-foot gates, and yes, he has plenty of security. But he also knows if shit really hits the fan, his own security will kill him.
Yeah.
So
Jeff Bezos and people like that.
That's why it's very, very important for us as a culture to start thinking as we and not big, big, big fucking capital fuck you I.
It's very interesting that in China there's that we mentality, that's coming from their history, thousands of years thinking. I think it's Confucianism or Taoism that infuses some belief in the
Taoism, yeah. Or I don't know,
in the family
one
and
or the
the
other.
hierarchy and working as a unit as opposed to an individual.
Yeah, and it's a balance, right? So the balance there is that when you're really young, you must concentrate on the I, right? When you get older, you still need to concentrate on the I.
Why? Is it because of the way you're perceiving and filtering the world?
No, because I's develop things, and we's make those things work for everyone, right? So you need the I's, and we had a lot of I's in America. We had a lot of people who had like this I mentality. I'm going to achieve something amazing. I'm going to go and see land that nobody else has seen before, right? You need the I's at the beginning of their lives, right? So Chinese, they beat the I's out of their children early on, and they shove them into the we pattern, right? What you need is the gradual transitioning from the I to the we. You want to be the I in your 20s. You want to be the I we in your 30s, where you only care about your family, but for the rest of the world, it's all about me, right?
Yeah.
But when you get into your 50s and in your 60s and your 70s, the eye needs to disappear. You've already done your eye. Your eye is gone. Now,
It's hard for some
now you
people
need to do
to.
the we.
It's just hard for people to transition away from the I.
But see, a truly great man cannot achieve true greatness until he lets go of the I and embraces the we.
Mm. I think we makes you happier.
We makes you happier. This is why you want it in your retirement, so you can be happy. You want to shift from I to we, right? But you can't do it too early. The Chinese, with their mentality, they have flaws too. They move into the we way too fast, way too early. Their government is very we orientated, right? And everything in their society is very we orientated, and they shove in there way too fast. What they need to do is they need to do a lot more, and then what happens is it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen for people are people everywhere, right? Chinese have the same mentality, not the same mentality necessarily, but the same propensities to mentality as Americans do.
Because we're all human.
We're all humans. We all share most of our DNA.
Yeah.
Right. So the I becomes the undercurrent to their society. Right. This is why we think of Chinese as being sneaky. Well, it's sneaky because in America, you can be a proud I in your 20s. In China, you have to be a sneaky I in your 20s because it's not appropriate to be a proud I in your 20s, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but this is why it's very important, the whole yin yang. One cannot exist without the other. The one cannot exist without the community, but the community cannot exist without the one either.
Mm-hmm.
If you suppress all the I's, you kill the community. But if you have every single asshole in the community thinking of themselves as the only one that matters, then you don't really have a community.
Mm-hmm.
That's the important. That's the balance that we need to achieve.
I thought they were moving towards that because prior to having this podcast, I was reading that China requires both men and women to do 2 weeks to a month of military training prior to starting college.
Okay.
Or it's included in their college education so that they can go from thinking of themselves as an I to thinking of themselves as a we and preparing them to work as a we.
See, that's too early.
In college.
That's way too early.
Years. Interesting.
I don't think you should start pushing people towards the we until they make something out of themselves, really.
Mm.
Yeah, but
because they want to really shove into them nationalism. They want them to be thinking about their national identity and protecting that national identity.
Well, I mean, at the same rate, like when I think about America, reading that book Hillbillyology, which by the way was the wrong book. I still need to remember the book that I actually was thinking about when I brought it up on the podcast a few weeks back. But we finished reading Hillbillyology, and in that book, I noticed one thing.
What is that?
I noticed that the guy talked very fondly about his time in the military. And I think his time in the military was in Marine Corps, specifically, was beneficial to him in many ways, right? Problem is that not most people, but actually few people like myself, for instance, are not suited for the military. Meaning that it's very simple. Either the military will kill me or I will kill the military. But there's going to be no happy coexistence at any one point. Too much hatred towards any kind of authority on my part, and too much, love for authority on their part.
I was wondering how Israel manages to get a lot, people of Russian descent into their military, because in Israel it's mandatory that you also be in the military for, I don't know, maybe months, year, 2, I don't know.
It's 2 years and then they're out, so they're not, you don't have to be a good soldier, you just have to be a soldier, and then just go in and just get out. And most of them get out of it. Most of the Russian descent Jews get out, because Russian descent Jews are, first of all, the most annoying human beings on planet Earth.
People who also are allergic to authority.
Yeah, and highly allergic to authority. I have 3% Russian Jew in me. And that already created a tremendous hatred towards authority. So yeah, I can understand that. And but again,
I can't imagine that being a pleasant experience for anyone who has a severe allergy or a need to question authority.
Well, so what happens is they go in and they get out.
Okay.
They go in and they get out, or they just get out of it altogether. through various family connections and such,
Mm-hmm.
for medical reasons, all kinds of bullshit reasons. So that's very common. If you lived in Israel, you would know all the tricks on how to do it. I'm sure, especially if you're Russian. Oh my god.
I wonder
So one thing about the
what
Russians, they're
percentage of
very good at being sneaky.
the population has a
Speaking from
clear
experience,
allergy. What percentage of all people in in Earth's population has a severe allergy to authority?
Probably all the intelligent people.
Mm-hmm.
Probably anybody with an IQ above 110, pretty much.
I used to read this woman who was a comedy writer, I think, for Hollywood, and then they moved out to the boonies in Northern California to live off the grid and whatever. And she had a severe allergy to authority.
Well, what kind of authority can there be in the middle of nowhere?
The reason I say that is because she gave one of her kids, like toddlers, a question authority t-shirt, and the cashier at one of the local food stores was like, really? That's the mentality you want to,
Instill in your child?
instill in your child?
Uh-huh.
And, she was having a laugh at it because, yes, that is. I want my child to question authority.
Well, question authority doesn't... See, the other thing that people don't understand is there are stupid ways and there's a smart way to question authority, right? So a stupid way to question authority is just like question them because they are an authority. So somebody tells you like 2 + 2 is 4, and they're like, well, how do you know it's 4? I need to question you because you're authority. But what that saying really should mean is question authority on questions of opinion, not questions of fact, of questions of, if somebody has an opinion, they say, it's better to do it this way. Don't just blindly accept it. Just say, ask questions. Question authority literally means don't say, I think you're wrong. Can you prove yourself right? No, that's stupid. That just makes you a dick. Question authority by instead saying, why? Somebody tells you, you should wash your hands because washing your hands leads to you not getting sick as much, right? Your answer should be why.
Because there are bacteria in your hands and viruses that could potentially make you ill.
What about the fact that people who live in very dirty environments are less susceptible to COVID-19, for instance?
You hope your child doesn't know that.
Yeah, exactly. So then the lesson
then it's a balance.
The lessons to that is what? On one side, question authority by asking questions,
right.
Not by stabbing them in the forehead and taking over them, by asking questions. On the other hand, if you are an authority and you encourage questioning yourself, then you by very nature must be at least a decent authority, because you are allowing questioning of yourself and you recognize the fact that as an authority, it is your job to explain to the people why they should do something that you tell them to do, not just tell it to them. It's just like again, we don't remember if it's Taoism or...
I think it's Taoism.
Taoism in Chinese tradition.
It's the yin and yang.
Well, so then it's the other one. It's the Confucianism, where the student must listen to the master, right?
Yes.
And they have this idea that as a student you must obey the master, right? Mm-hmm. But the thing that nobody talks about ever for some reason, for a reason that'll become obvious in a second, is that the second part of that teaching is that as a master you must place the interests of your student at the very least at the same level as yours or above them, right? So it's the duty of the student to listen to the master, but it's the duty of the master to do everything in their power to protect and grow the student, right?
Like in Harry Potter.
Well, yeah, there's...
He had a few, like that Snape fellow.
Yeah, he had a good influences and bad influences, but that's something you see in stories, like Harry Potter, but very rarely do you see, and you see that in interpersonal relationships in life, but very rarely do you see it on a governmental scale. It's always like obey us or else. It's not obey us, but we're also looking out for you, and here's all the reasons and all the ways we're looking out for you. It's always because the problem.
Well, idealistically, it's like that. It's like obey us because we're looking out for
But
you.
the problem is that the people who are enforcing the laws
Yeah.
are not don't have that mindset because you don't carry that mindset. You don't carry this Confucianist mindset with you throughout, right?
No.
So maybe the person who set the law did so to protect people, but the person who enforces the law isn't doing it to protect people. They are only doing it because they like enforcing shit.
Yeah.
That's the thing. So I think China has their we problem, and I think America has a severe I problem. And we'll need to resolve both of those problems in order to happily coexist. So when you said, how do we avoid, World War III? Well, we need to solve our I problem, and China needs to solve their we problem.
Mm-hmm.
Their overdependence on we and our overdependence on I.
Well, it could take them just 10 years in order for them to shift their mentality.
I think so, because it's much easier to shift from we to I, because you basically say
humans have an instinctual desire to think about themselves first.
Yeah. And basically, because what you're doing is basically saying, oh, now you can think a little bit more about yourself. Now you can ratchet up how much you pay it. And not maybe, but almost certainly China is going to end up, by the way, in the same situation in another 50 years to 100 years from now.
Like America?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that has a tendency to happen with empires.
It happens in cycles, no matter what. So the question here is not whether or not we as America want to be number one, because I think the ship has sailed on that one, basically. It just has. But we need to re-badge ourselves, re-figure it out, and reboot ourselves, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of looking at it as the death of our empire, let's look at it as the first step towards the next empire that we're going to build.
Mm-hmm.
And we can build that next empire by investing in education right now, investing in productivity right now. Like, think about it this way. If we really looked into it and said,
instead of making our education system weaker, which I think there has been
We
a
are.
tendency.
We are making it better, worse and worse and worse. And we're sending everybody to college, which I think is completely unnecessary.
Instead of vocational training, which is what most people would benefit from.
Yeah. In Germany, I think they were doing like these breakdowns where basically every single student in Germany, after finishing high school, not every single, obviously, but you get my point. Like the overwhelming majority of
like
people.
60, 70, 80% of the people.
No, not 90. More than 90%.
Okay.
More than 90% end up either in college
Mm-hmm.
or in a vocational school.
Right.
After high school.
Mm-hmm.
In America, whoever doesn't end up in college basically ends up just working.
Yeah.
On low-level jobs. Meaningless jobs.
Maybe some of them get associate's degree and some of them get...
Well, what the fuck does the associate's degree get you? Why do we even have what are you an associate of?
I don't know.
What the fuck does it mean to be an associate? I associate with science because I have a associate's degree of science?
There are vocational schools like mechanics who can get certified by somebody or another, right?
Yeah.
Cosmetologists.
Yeah, welders, plumbers, barbers. Yeah. All those people can get certified and they can go into a vocational school. But personally, I don't see...
I think nursing too is...
Nursing is huge. Apparently you can get paid like $18,000 a month right now as a nurse in California.
Ooh, wow.
Yeah. If you don't have to train you. But that was only for short term because they were overrun with COVID cases and shit. A friend of mine was telling me because his wife is a nurse and she was offered to relocate here for $18,000 a month plus living expenses.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. But again, short term, it's like they're thinking about for a couple of months to make some money. But it's also stressful, of course, because you would have to look for another job after you finish. So that's why it's expensive too.
Oh, I see. Because you're not guaranteed the old job that you had back at home.
Yeah, they're going to fill it. You have to quit.
Oh, I see.
So that's why they pay so much. Because
you might be unemployed for.
You might be unemployed for. Well, you probably won't be unemployed, but it's like it's a risk. You have to take a risk, so they have to make it worth your while to take the risk.
Gotcha.
And apparently, the reason they're doing it is they have all these nurse graduates right now coming out of nursing schools in California who can't find work. because none of the hospitals want to train them. They don't want to pay for training.
Oh, I see.
So they instead saying like, oh, it's cheaper for us to pay $18,000 to a already trained nurse and steal her or him from
a neighboring state.
a neighboring state than it is to invest money into our own people.
Yeah.
Which is insane. It's fucking insane yet again. But it shows you how capitalism works. Capitalism works by not prioritizing shit that actually matters. Right? So, for instance, capitalism is wonderful for distributing resources. So, if you have 5 companies who are all competing to produce a better widget, right? And it's all the same kind of widget with different iterations of it, right? You want capitalism because capitalism will drive their profits to zero and will make sure that only the cheapest and the best one will survive, right? But if you're using capitalism to distribute things like, for instance, jobs to people because you need employment, if you consider employment not just a side effect and an unfortunate side effect of capitalism, but if you consider employment as the primary goal of society in order to maintain some kind of cohesion in society, right? Then all of a sudden capitalism becomes not such a great idea, right? Right? Or you can rework capitalism, retool capitalism, as Ray Dalio, for instance, argues, in a sense where in America, for instance, we can become another manufacturing powerhouse. Maybe not as big as China, but maybe as big as China. But the way that we can do that is by heavily investing in automation technology, heavily going into things like automated production of almost everything, right? It's going to be hard. It's going to be a lot of trial and error. We have to be prepared to suck at it for the next 10 years, 15 years, probably 20 years. Yeah. We have to be prepared to be number 2, or God forbid, maybe even number 3 for the next decade or so, or 2 decades. Yeah. But it would be wonderful. It would be magnificent if I could take 2 decades of my life right now and invest it in automating and making America a powerhouse and then retiring. Yeah, that would be a good accomplishment for my lifetime. For a good accomplishment for our lifetimes in America is to turn America into another manufacturing powerhouse. But the only way we'll be able to do so is if we give up the illusion and the idea that we'll be able to do so with employment of humans. It has to be automated. It's got to be automated, right? So those coal miners...
And it's strange because, right now with the pandemic, with everything that's happening between China and the U.S., it's a perfect time and it's a perfect incentive to...
This is the time to strike.
To move in that direction.
Yeah, but the only way we can move in that direction, because let's take the coal miners of the Kentucky area as an example, right? I'll have to run back really quickly to another idea, the thought that I had because I never finished it. But the coal miners in Kentucky, most of those people will be useless in my proposed automated economy. Most of them will be useless. Right? By most, I mean like let's say 80%, 60 to 80% of them are not going to be productive members of our future society if we build it the way I propose it, with automated production as our main nation's goal, so to speak, right? But we can't
disown them and
forget them if we think of our country as a big we.
Yeah.
So then the question becomes, and also just because they are not productive or just because they're not productive or helpful in production doesn't mean they're useless as individuals.
Right.
They're just not productive.
Yeah.
In producing things, right? So we need to figure out, how do we disperse to them? How do we give them benefits of our future society in such a way that they still feel humane, in a humane way, that they feel human,
dignity,
and they feel like they have still dignity in our society, even if our society doesn't significantly benefit from their existence. Right? Why? Because that's the ethical thing to do, and because without doing it, if we can give people who are not particularly useful in our society right now meaning and dignity, well, at the very least, they're not going to try to kill us, and at most, hopefully, they'll do everything in their power to actually support the project and get behind the project, even if they're like, well, they didn't give me a job, so I just have to sit home and collect my government paycheck that pays my automation paycheck. But I go to the park, I take care of kids, I have regular, big good giveaways and shit like that to contribute to my society because they're contributing to me,
Mm-hmm.
right? That could make our society much better. By contrast, if you don't give these people anything, and if you make them fight like cats and dogs over like a few positions that are left,
Mm-hmm.
you're just going to deteriorate your culture into garbage, into pure garbage, right? And that comes back to my original.
Well, it's very strongly there right now because of the opioid epidemic in
Yeah,
the Midwest and the Deep South and whatever.
yeah. And a lot of those people are already living on government cheese.
Mm-hmm.
We'll read the Hillbillyology if you don't believe me, and he covers it very nicely there. They're already, we always think about a black family living on welfare, right? That's the Republican concept, always like, oh, look at those black people, those welfare queens collecting welfare paychecks. But in reality, it's a bunch of white dudes who don't have any jobs in the middle of the country, right? Who are collecting this, and of course the Hillbillyology book. What's his name?
J.D. Vance.
J.D. Vance, yeah, he pushes it all on culture. But I really like if you read these two books. Oh, I'm sorry, if you read Hillbillyology, read it back to back with
The War on Normal People.
The War on
by
Normal.
Andrew Yang.
There, read those two books because they're basically yin yang. They're the first book explains the problem and gives you half a solution, and then the second book explains to you even more of the problem and gives you the other half of the solution.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So you really have to read those both books back to back in order to understand.
One of them is from the insider's point of view, and the other one's from an outsider's point of view.
So from J.D. Vance, from the insider's point of view, he paints you the entire problems with their culture.
Yeah.
And he says, oh, we have shitty culture. We need to change our culture, which is true.
Yeah.
Which is 100% true. But that's half a solution. The other half a solution is this culture also happens to live in an economic area that just doesn't have any jobs.
And opportunities.
Doesn't have any opportunities.
Yeah.
You have an opportunity to be a Walmart clerk, and you have an opportunity to be a tire shop.
Or a nurse.
Or a nurse. And that's about it. So we need to touch those people somehow and convey to those people that they're important. But at the same time, we need to give them enough money to survive on, enough resources to survive on, and to thrive, to really thrive on, right? And we
have
need
some sense of stability and security, because humans need a sense of security and stability in order to thrive.
And I think a lot of those people may need, we may either need to really do a grand repositioning of the American culture, and that may come after a really bad civil war, which I think we're headed into right now. Or we can do a more gradual, more slight shift. I think the gradual and slight shift will always be more difficult because people really like doing either. It's kind of like, I don't know how many of our listeners code, but if you guys code or anything like that, it's always instinctually, you're always drawn towards like, let's do a rewrite instead of like, let's patch and fix things on this code, right? Because it's always more difficult to patching and fixing than it is.
Oh, it's tedious.
It is much more tedious, right?
Gosh.
But sometimes it's quicker. It's tedious, but it's something you can do very tediously for 3 days and get it done versus rewriting the whole thing in full glory for 3 or 4 months, right? So it really does depend what your goals are right here. But I think we can be good with it's called in programming, it's called refactoring. So we can do with a bit of a refactoring, or we can do with a full rewrite.
Mm-hmm.
The refactoring is going to be more difficult, but might be achieved with less pain and less death. The full rewrite will require a full-blown civil war, which I think might actually happen.
And sink us into anarchy.
Yeah. So the question is, do we want to go through a cycle where we go into anarchy and chaos and then come out as the magnificent American phoenix out of it? Or do we want to just dip a little bit, be number 2 for a few decades, and then become number 1 again.
Mm.
And if we like the second option, then we really need to learn how to share the pie. That we really need to think about in we terms now. And we really need to understand that human beings, simply because they're human, deserve enough resources to live. If we can come to terms with those 3 simple concepts, people deserve to live because they're people.
Mm-hmm.
We need to think of ourselves as we instead of I.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to learn how to share the pie. We do those 3 things, and then we ask ourselves, how can we become the production capital of the world? Not in capitalistic terms. Not thinking, how can one company in America become the best company in the world? But how can every company in America become the best in their industry,
How can
in
we
the
pool
world?
our resources together?
Yes.
Both human capital and labor capital.
Yeah.
Labor capital.
How can we implement capitalism to help us, not as the end goal? Because let's be honest about it. Let's remember, capitalism is not the end goal. Capitalism is a tool that you use to get to the end goal of prosperity.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
So you get prosperity from capitalism. You don't build capitalism so you can have capitalism, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if capitalism no longer develops prosperity to you, because let's remember the doctrines of capitalism is what got us here. Capitalism has no issues whatsoever with anything that we've done in the last 40 years, and capitalism doesn't have any issues with anything that China has done in the last 40 years. In fact, capitalism is slowly standing there and doing a slow clap in the back of the room for China because they finally realized what China was doing. Right?
Yeah.
So we have to recognize capitalism is not our friend here. They agree with China. We can use capitalism as a tool, but we need to figure out what our vision is. Because the American dream, the way we dreamed it, is a selfish bullshit of a dream dreamt up by bullshit artists. You know, the whole, white picket fence and 1.5 dogs and 3.5 children and whatever the fuck it's supposed to be in the suburbs of America. That's bullshit that existed for like a period of 20 years and is not sustainable. If you map it out sociologically, if you map it out economically, if you map it out in any shape or form for a long enough period of time, and by long enough I mean like more than 20 years, you will see that entire system collapsing. We can go over on a podcast, another podcast. It just collapses. It doesn't function like that.
Why? Why does it fail? And does it only take one generation for it to fail?
Pretty much. It pretty much takes one generation for it to fail.
Why?
Well, because everybody in America can't achieve all those things all at the same time. Because the American dream was that you work really hard, you get yourself a white picket fence and a house in the suburbs, and one of your from your family, a man usually would go to work, and the woman would stay home and bake cookies and take care of the children, blah 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 blah. But then the mother of the mother, so the grandmother falls ill, and then the mother needs to go somewhere else to take care of her mother, and then the husband needs to drop off the children before going to work, and then he goes to work, and then there is a project, and then he gets drunk, he forgets to pick up the children, DCFS comes and takes their children. That shit happens. Life happens. What we've had is this perfect society that worked if every single thing worked perfectly. Not just rational actors. You assumed rational actors and no bad luck ever. Ever.
Oh.
Right? And you assumed that people would still maintain communal bonds while living in their separate houses and not interacting with each other very much and putting up tall fences. And you assumed that people will be happy and driving to work longer and longer and longer, because as new generations come up, they're no longer able to buy in the immediate suburbs, and they need to buy in further away suburbs, and then further away suburbs, and then further away suburbs from the city. And we didn't anticipate that the people in their 60s and 70s will be buying a third and fourth vacation house, while people in their 20s can barely scrape enough money to rent a place, let alone buy it.
Yeah.
See, that's the thing. When you carry this out,
A
it
few
doesn't work out,
generations.
because basically this American suburb, the 1950s idyllic suburb, is a gigantic fucking phallus, an eye in the middle of the country, just saying, I matter. And then those people around me, they matter a little bit less than I, but they also matter. Nothing else matters. The only thing that matters is within this designated line that's designated by my white picket fence.
Fascinating.
And it's not like it was
Well,
sold like that.
right now, other ideas are still sold, like the get rich quick scheme, where you can have all those things. You know, the white picket fence, the wife, and the 2 kids, or whatever. It's still a dream that appeals to some people. Or, you know, if you're a young male, maybe the dream of having lots of women, or, you know.
Well, then you
if-
join the Muslims, don't you? So you can get the 72 virgins. I don't know.
Right. Or if you're
Well,
if you're a young
Islam.
woman, that you can be, you know, totally independent and cool and fashionable and strong and powerful, whatever, right?
Well, I mean, and you can be all those things, of course, right? But your entire society can't be those things,
Yeah.
right? So you can't have a society of eyes, because it's not going to be a society. It's just going to be a bunch of Donald Trumps. Like here's the thing: if you want to understand why what I'm saying is true, picture Donald Trump. Now picture 10 Donald Trumps all sitting around the same table. Now let them in your mind's eye, just let them sit there for 2 hours. And just picture what happens in 2 hours. Just cut to the scene. Cut to the scene 2 hours from now. It'll be wigs flying everywhere and 2 Donald Trumps choking each other to death.
Yeah.
With other corpses lying around with ballpoint pens sticking out of their eyeball sockets. Because this is what's going to happen.
Oh,
They're not going to have a civil conversation about philosophy.
of
No.
course not.
They're going to talk about how awesome each one of them is, and then they're going to try to kill each other.
Right. Gosh. We're all living in a big illusion of, or delusion of, greatness.
Delusion of greatness and grandeur. We've been living on a credit card for the last 40 years, and now it's time to actually pay the bill.
Gosh.
And again,
It hurts my soul deeply.
but we can do better. We can learn. We can do better. We can, as a society, we can do better. And again, very simple prescription. Learn to share the pie. Don't just share the rewards. You know, the rich people have vastly shared the rewards of America for the last 40 years. The rich people have only gotten rich in America for the last 40 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
Very successfully, right? Now that the thing is shrinking, now that the American economy is shrinking, now that the pie is shrinking, you did really well rising with everybody. It's time to fall with everybody. Don't try to weasel your way out of it. Don't try to.
It's greed, really.
It's greed. But recognize you'll be fine. You'll be fine even if you have now 20 millions instead of 30. You'll be fine if you have 20 billion instead of 30. You'll be fine if you have 200 billion instead of 300 billion. You know, you'll be fine. There are many other people who will not be fine if they had $1,000 and now they have $300 or $200 to their name, right? Keep that in mind, and keep in mind the fact that even if you really fucking hate those people and you think that they're all deserve it and you did everything on your own and you had no luck in your life, let's pretend that all of that is true, which it's not, but let's pretend it's all true, and you just do it out of selfish fucking reasons, because if you don't learn to share, other people will kill you and take your shit. Read history if you don't believe me. This isn't the first time we're doing this. This isn't the first spin around the merry-go-round.
But
And
it
then
is the first spin for this generation of
it's this
people.
first spin for your generation. It's the first spin in your lifetime, but not in the lifetime of this world.
If you think about it, most people in America have not seen a real war.
Yeah.
Like, they don't have anyone that they know that has been in a real conflict.
Well, no, that's not true because we have many people in America who have been in Afghanistan and in Iraq and who lost limbs in Afghanistan and Iraq. We have many, but that's very, very tight. There are very few people in America who know people who have been in Afghanistan. Like we know many Marines, for instance, who haven't even been outside of America.
Yeah.
The ones who have been deployed and served some time overseas, that's a very small percentage. And as a result, and we also never had a war on American soil, which is the bigger
Since the Civil War.
since the Civil War. Exactly. And now the second Civil War is coming. Now we're going to have Civil War 2.0, even civiler, and it's going to destroy America if we don't recognize my little three truths. Think of we, not of I. Don't think of yourself in the next couple of years. Think of what's better for America in the next couple of years, right?
Interesting. Shall we wrap up this podcast?
Yeah, well, I'm done preaching about we. If you want to join the Church of We, go to we.we.we and sign up. Not really, but maybe it's a good idea.
Anyways, we'll see you next time.
All right, see you guys.